It began with a scream in the dark halls of the Hagia Sophia, a priest collapsing to his knees as word spread. The Pope in Rome had excommunicated the Patriarch of Constantinople. In return, the Patriarch did the same. Two men of God, each claiming divine authority, had torn the church in half. This was no simple dispute. This was the moment when a 1,000-year-old unity shattered, and two paths of Christianity were born, Catholic and Orthodox. In 1453, the unthinkable happened. The great city of Constantinople, once the beating heart of Eastern Christendom, fell to the Ottoman Turks. The Hagia Sophia, crown jewel of Orthodox worship, was transformed into a mosque. The Byzantine Empire, already weakened by centuries of war and division, was no more. For the Orthodox Church, this wasn't just the fall of an empire, it was the collapse of a sacred world. The emperor, long seen as God's defender on earth, was gone. The Patriarch now served under Islamic rule, his authority reduced and his church placed under Ottoman oversight. The West watched, but did little. Rome had hoped for unity through the failed Council of Florence, but when the city cried out for help, few Western knights came. Many in the East saw this as abandonment or punishment for refusing papal supremacy. Some in the West viewed the fall as divine judgment for heresy. Others mourned the loss of a Christian bastion. But for the Orthodox, the fall marked the final severing of ties, not just politically, but spiritually. The Great Schism, once a wound, had become a scar carved deep into history, no longer fresh, but never healed. By the year 1054, centuries of tension had built like cracks in a stone cathedral. East and West were drifting apart, not just in faith, but in culture, politics, and language. Latin clashed with Greek, celibate priests clashed with married clergy, and in Rome, the Pope saw himself as the supreme authority of Christendom. In Constantinople, the Patriarch saw that as arrogance. The final spark? A mission of papal legates arrived in Constantinople. Arrogant, unyielding, and dismissive of local custom, they delivered a bull of excommunication onto the altar during a service. Insulted and enraged, Patriarch Michael Cerularius responded in kind. The Great Schism had begun, and Christendom would never be the same. Chapter 7. Clergy and Celibacy. A divided priesthood. In the West, celibacy was law. By the 11th century, Roman Catholic priests were forbidden to marry. Celibacy was seen as a sign of purity, a reflection of Christ's sacrifice, and a full devotion to God. Marriage, they believed, could distract from spiritual duties. But in the East, the rules were different. Orthodox tradition allowed married men to become priests, though bishops were still chosen from among the celibate monks. For the Eastern Church, a married clergy reflected the reality of parish life. A priest with a family was closer to his flock, more grounded in the daily struggles of the people he served. Rome viewed this with suspicion. Could a man torn between God and wife truly serve both? Constantinople, in turn, saw Rome's demands as unnatural and cruel, an elevation of discipline above compassion. This difference in priestly life revealed a deeper philosophical divide. The West leaned toward legalism, uniformity, and rigid control. The East embraced tradition, mysticism, and local variation. As more differences piled up, each side began to see the other not just as different, but as disobedient, even heretical. The rift widened not just in belief, but in everyday practice. With Constantinople fallen and the Byzantine emperor dead, the Eastern Orthodox world looked for new leadership. Eyes turned north, to Moscow. There, a new power was rising, proud and fiercely orthodox, and with it came a bold idea. If Rome was the first Christian capital and Constantinople the second, then Moscow would be the third and final Rome. The Russian princes embraced this destiny. Ivan III married Sophia Paleologina, niece of the last Byzantine emperor, linking Moscow to the imperial bloodline. Russian rulers adopted the title Tsar, derived from Caesar, and claimed to be heirs of Christian empire. The Russian Orthodox Church, increasingly independent, saw itself as the guardian of true faith, uncompromised by Rome's innovations or political entanglements. While Western Europe wrestled with Reformation and Renaissance, Moscow stood firm in tradition, ritual, and mystical theology. To many Orthodox believers, the faith had survived not because of Rome or Constantinople, but because of resilience in the East. Moscow wasn't just a city, it was a symbol, a fortress of purity amid the chaos of schism and conquest. As the West moved forward with reform and global expansion, the East turned inward, determined to preserve what it saw as the unbroken light of original Christianity. As the centuries passed, theology in East and West continued to drift apart, not just in structure and leadership, but in the very way faith was understood. At the heart of it were different questions and different answers about salvation, sin, and God himself. In the West, influenced by Augustine of Hippo, sin was seen as guilt inherited from Adam, a legal stain requiring satisfaction and redemption. Salvation was often framed as a courtroom drama: humanity guilty, Christ the substitute, the cross the payment. Grace, sacraments, and penance became tightly structured. The East, however, took a different approach. Sin was not so much guilt as it was illness, a distortion of human nature. Salvation wasn't just forgiveness, but transformation. Christ was the healer, not the judge. The goal of life was theosis, union with God through grace, prayer, and participation in divine life. Even the Trinity was approached differently. Where the West leaned into precise definitions and rational logic, the East embraced mystery, paradox, and the unknowable majesty of God. These weren't just academic distinctions, they shaped prayer, liturgy, and how believers lived their faith. Over time, the two Christian worlds no longer just disagreed, they no longer spoke the same spiritual language. Both Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism venerate saints, but even here, the differences reveal deeper divides. In the West, canonization became a formal process, investigated, verified, and declared by the Pope. Rome centralized sainthood, using it to reinforce papal authority and universal doctrine. In the East, saints emerged more organically. Holiness was recognized by the local church, often affirmed by miracles or enduring veneration among the faithful. There was no central office to approve a saint, only the church's living memory, liturgical honor, and spiritual fruit. This contrast highlighted differing views on spiritual authority. The West built a towering structure, pope, curia, canon law, where divine guidance flowed from the top down. The East, by contrast, emphasized conciliarity, tradition, and mysticism. Authority rested more with the continuity of faith than with individual leaders. Even the types of saints varied. The Catholic Church canonized scholars, missionaries, and martyrs, often tied to church governance. The Orthodox honored monks, mystics, and miracle workers, those who embodied spiritual depth and divine encounter. Both sides sought the holy, but they walked different paths to find it. And in doing so, they came to different understandings of what holiness looked like and who had the right to declare it. In the West, after Rome fell, the Church became the guardian of civilization. With no emperor to guide it, the Pope filled the vacuum spiritually and politically. Kings bowed before the papal throne, and the Church crowned emperors, not the other way around. But in the East, the story was different. The Byzantine emperor stood as God's chosen ruler on earth, protector of the faith, and often its arbiter. He summoned councils, influenced doctrine, and even appointed patriarchs. Church and state walked hand in hand, but it was the emperor who often led the way. This fundamental difference shaped how each side saw authority. To Rome, the Pope was independent of all earthly kings. To Constantinople, spiritual leadership worked within imperial power. When the Pope made decisions without imperial consultation, the East bristled. When the emperor interfered in theology, the West recoiled. The divide grew sharper with time. Western popes saw themselves above kings. Eastern patriarchs worked within an empire that lasted 1,000 years. Two systems, two models of church and power, and no bridge between them. What emerged was not simply a theological split, but two very different Christian worlds, each shaped by the throne it knelt beside. In theory, all bishops were brothers under Christ. In practice, two rose above all others, the Pope of Rome and the Patriarch of Constantinople. Each believed they held a special role in guiding the Christian world, but what that role meant was bitterly contested. The Pope, seated in Rome, claimed supremacy over all Christendom. He was the heir of St. Peter, the rock upon which Christ built his church. His authority, he argued, was universal and absolute. To many in the Latin West, the Pope was the voice of God on earth. The East rejected that idea. To the Orthodox mind, the Patriarch of Constantinople was first among equals, respected but not supreme. True authority lay in councils, in consensus, not in one man. The idea of a single, infallible leader was not just foreign, it was dangerous. This clash of governance, monarchical papacy versus collegial episcopacy, became a ticking time bomb. The Pope expected obedience, the Patriarch demanded respect, neither would yield. As imperial politics swirled around them, spiritual pride and political ambition blurred. What began as theological disagreement soon looked like a struggle for power, one crown of Christendom, but two heads fighting to wear it. As Christianity spread beyond the old Roman Empire, so did competition between Rome and Constantinople. Evangelizing wasn't just a spiritual duty, it became a contest of influence, language, and loyalty. In Eastern Europe, particularly among the Slavs, both churches raced to convert new peoples. In the 9th century, Byzantine missionaries Saints Cyril and Methodius brought Christianity to Great Moravia. They translated scriptures into the Slavic tongue and developed the Glagolitic alphabet, laying the groundwork for what became Cyrillic. But Latin missionaries soon followed, insisting on Latin liturgy and papal authority. This overlap led to confusion, conflict, and even forced expulsions. Whose Christianity would the Slavs follow? That answer had deep political consequences. Bulgaria became a major battleground. Torn between Eastern liturgy and Western allegiance, its rulers played one side against the other. Eventually, most Slavic nations leaned toward Constantinople, cementing Eastern Orthodoxy in places like Serbia and Russia. To the west, these conversions were losses of souls and influence. To the east, Roman aggression looked like imperialism in holy robes. Missionary work, once a shared cause, had become a silent war. The gospel was the same, but the hands offering it were no longer united. In the 16th century, a storm shook the Catholic West, one that left the Eastern Orthodox Church watching from afar. Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in 1517, igniting the Protestant Reformation. What began as a call for reform erupted into a splintering of Western Christianity. To the east, it was a dramatic unraveling. Dozens of new denominations rose: Lutherans, Calvinists, Anabaptists, all rejecting papal authority and many long-held Catholic teachings. Sacred tradition, the Eucharist, the veneration of saints, nearly all came under fire. Orthodox theologians observed with caution. While they agreed with some Protestant critiques of Rome, especially concerning papal supremacy, they also saw the Reformation as chaos. The rejection of tradition, icons, and apostolic succession clashed deeply with Eastern theology. Luther's principle of sola scriptura, scripture alone, was alien to a church that held scripture and holy tradition as inseparable. Ironically, the Reformation made the Catholic Church turn inward, reforming through the Council of Trent, tightening dogma, and further distinguishing itself from the Orthodox East. The schism had once been a two-way split. Now, the Western Church fractured further, while the East stood apart, unchanged, still divided, still watching. After 1054, no thunder echoed through the skies, no armies marched. The world didn't immediately change. But beneath the quiet, a profound shift had occurred, one that would echo for centuries. The excommunications didn't cause instant chaos, but they marked a deep psychological rupture. The Patriarch of Constantinople and the Pope of Rome no longer recognized each other's authority. Dialogue ceased, letters went unanswered. The channels that once connected East and West were silent. At first, many Christians thought the break was temporary. Schisms had happened before, only to be healed. But this one hardened with time. Theological schools diverged, liturgies evolved in isolation. Generations grew up knowing only one side of the Christian world and fearing or mistrusting the other. What was once the united body of Christendom had split into two hearts, Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox. Each carried its own memory, its own rituals, and its own sense of divine truth. The Great Schism was not a single event. It was a slow freezing of a relationship that once pulsed with shared faith. And once frozen, it would take centuries to even begin thawing. When Pope Urban II called the First Crusade in 1095, he appealed to the Eastern Christians for unity against the Muslim threat. For a moment, it seemed the schism might soften. Western knights marched east to defend the Byzantine Empire. But the alliance quickly soured. Crusaders, driven by zeal and glory, arrived not as humble defenders, but as unpredictable warriors. They disrespected local customs, clashed with Orthodox clergy, and often acted more like conquerors than allies. To the Byzantines, they were dangerous guests. To the Westerners, the Easterners were cowardly and ungrateful. As the Crusades continued, mistrust deepened. The Western Church began establishing Latin patriarchates in Eastern lands, replacing Orthodox leaders with Latin ones. It was spiritual colonization, and the Orthodox world saw it as betrayal. The final blow came in 1204, when the Fourth Crusade, intended for Muslim Egypt, was diverted to Constantinople. Western Crusaders sacked the Holy City, looted churches, and desecrated sacred relics. Blood flowed in the streets of Christendom's eastern heart. From that moment, reconciliation seemed impossible. What had been a theological division now felt like a war between civilizations. The scars of the Crusades would never truly fade from the Orthodox soul. Step into a Catholic cathedral in Rome, and you'll find soaring stone, solemn silence, and carefully timed masses spoken in plain chant. Step into an Orthodox church in Thessaloniki, and you'll be wrapped in incense, surrounded by golden icons and enveloped in endless hymns echoing like the voice of eternity. Though both liturgies trace their roots to early Christian worship, over centuries they developed in strikingly different directions. In the West, the Roman Catholic Mass became increasingly structured and juridical, focused on precision, order, and sacramental law. Latin remained dominant for a millennium, and the tone was reverent, often subdued. The Eucharist was central, approached with quiet awe. In the East, the Divine Liturgy flourished with mystical grandeur, chanted from beginning to end, with priests behind iconostases and choirs responding in layers. The experience was sensory and transcendent. Icons weren't just art, they were theology in form, windows to the divine. Even gestures differed. Catholics knelt, Orthodox stood. Catholics used unleavened bread, Orthodox used leavened. Every small element reflected deeper theological differences. Over time, these liturgical paths became cultural identities, not just different ways of worship, but different ways of being Christian. Chapter 13. The Sack of Constantinople, a wound that would not heal. In April 1204, Christian knights of the Fourth Crusade did the unthinkable. They breached the walls of Constantinople, not as allies, but as invaders. What followed was not a holy war, but a nightmare. For 3 days, the capital of Eastern Christianity was plundered. Sacred icons were smashed, altars desecrated, and relics stolen. The Crusaders looted the Hagia Sophia, tearing gold and silver from its walls. Priests were slaughtered, nuns assaulted, and the treasures of a millennium scattered across Europe. This was not just a military betrayal, it was a spiritual catastrophe. The very people who claimed to fight for Christ had defiled his eastern sanctuary. For the Orthodox world, the sack of Constantinople was unforgivable. It burned the schism into memory with blood and ash. The Latin Church installed its own patriarch in the conquered city. The Byzantine Empire was fractured and humiliated. Though Constantinople would eventually be reclaimed in 1261, the damage, material and emotional, was done. To the Eastern Orthodox, this act wasn't just about power or politics. It proved that the Western Church no longer saw them as brethren. Despite bitterness and bloodshed, there were moments when the East and West tried to heal the wound. In the 13th and 15th centuries, councils were held to reunite the divided churches. Words were spoken, agreements were drafted, but unity remained elusive. The Council of Lyons in 1274 was one such moment. The Byzantine Emperor Michael VIII Palaiologos, desperate for Western aid against enemies, agreed to submit to papal authority. Rome celebrated. But in Constantinople, the reaction was outrage. The clergy and people rejected the union, calling it betrayal. The agreement collapsed. Later, at the Council of Florence in 1439, similar efforts were made. Eastern bishops again accepted papal primacy and the Filioque, hoping to gain military help against the rising Ottoman threat. Once more, the deal unraveled. The people of the East rejected Western theology and the idea of papal supremacy. These attempts revealed the depth of the divide. Unity achieved through politics could not mend theological and cultural rifts, centuries in the making. Trust had eroded, pride remained. Every failed reunion made the dream of reconciliation feel more distant, like trying to stitch together a torn tapestry whose threads no longer matched. Long before the Schism, two great cities sat like twin suns in the Christian world, Rome in the west, Constantinople in the east. Both claimed apostolic heritage, both held immense religious power, and both believed they stood as the true heart of Christianity. Rome, seat of St. Peter, saw its bishop, the Pope, as the vicar of Christ, supreme over all Christian leaders. Meanwhile, Constantinople, founded by Emperor Constantine himself, became the new Rome, home to the Byzantine Emperor and the powerful ecumenical patriarch. These were not just cities, they were competing visions of Christian authority. As the centuries passed, their differences deepened. The West aligned with the Latin-speaking feudal kingdoms of Europe. The East embraced Greek philosophy, imperial bureaucracy, and ancient liturgy. Political jealousies mixed with theological disagreements. Who had the final say in doctrine? Who led the universal church? Beneath the prayers and incense, a silent rivalry smoldered. While the faithful sang hymns, bishops wrote letters dripping with suspicion. Both sides saw the other as proud, stubborn, and misguided. By the 11th century, this quiet tension had become a looming fracture. The unity of Christendom was wearing thin, and all it needed was one final tear. After nearly 1,000 years of division, the 20th century brought a new tone, one not of excommunication but of conversation. The horrors of world wars, the rise of secularism, and the shared trials of modernity pushed both churches to reflect. Could the ancient wound finally begin to mend? In 1965, something remarkable happened. Pope Paul VI and Patriarch Athenagoras I met in Jerusalem. They prayed together, embraced, and declared a mutual lifting of the excommunications from 1054. It didn't restore full communion, but it was a powerful gesture, the first in centuries. Since then, popes and patriarchs have exchanged visits, messages, and joint statements. Dialogues have addressed theology, liturgy, and shared challenges. In some places, Catholics and Orthodox even collaborate on social and charitable work. Yet obstacles remain. Papal primacy continues to be a major sticking point. The Orthodox resist any authority placed above the collective voice of bishops, and centuries of historical mistrust still cast long shadows. But the ice has cracked. Where once there was silence, now there are words. Where once there was rivalry, now there is recognition. Art was never just decoration in the Christian world, it was theology in color. In the East, icons held a sacred place. These painted windows to heaven, often kissed and venerated, were central to Orthodox worship. Icons weren't mere art, they were believed to make the divine present. In the West, however, the view was different. While statues and images were used, they didn't carry the same spiritual weight. Rome often tolerated, even encouraged imagery, but placed less emphasis on its mystical function. And at times, especially during reform movements, some questioned their role entirely. The Eastern Church had already survived a great internal war over this. The iconoclast controversy in the 8th and 9th centuries had nearly torn Byzantium apart, with emperors banning icons and monks defending them with blood. The Orthodox Church emerged from that struggle fiercely protective of its sacred art. When Western Christians failed to share that reverence, or worse, misunderstood it as idolatry, it reopened old wounds. Latin critics often saw icon veneration as superstition. Eastern Christians saw such criticism as ignorance of holy tradition. Even in color and canvas, the East and West saw God through different eyes, one through mystery and symbol, the other through law and doctrine. Chapter 4. The Filioque Controversy. One word, endless division. In the original Nicene Creed, Christians professed belief in the Holy Spirit, who proceeds from the Father. But in the West, a tiny Latin addition crept in, Filioque, and the Son. Now the Spirit, according to Rome, proceeded from both the Father and the Son. To Western theologians, it was a harmless clarification, even a necessary one to defend against heresies. But in the East, it was heresy itself. How could the West alter a sacred creed without the consent of the universal church? Worse, this change struck at the heart of Trinitarian theology. The Eastern Church saw the Spirit's origin in the Father alone. Altering that balance distorted the very nature of God. The disagreement wasn't merely academic. The East viewed the Filioque as a symbol of Rome's pride, modifying holy doctrine unilaterally, then demanding others follow suit. It was an insult to the ecumenical councils, to church unity, and to the ancient traditions of the East. Theological dialogue turned into doctrinal warfare. Rome insisted. Constantinople refused. A single word, Filioque, became a symbol of two diverging paths, not just about how the Spirit moved, but how authority flowed within the church.